Hi, BookTube. It's Ros from Scarlet Telling About the Books.
And Tilly from Tilly's Shelf.
Hello. And every month this year, Tilly and I have been picking and reading a relatively recent bit of fiction and making a video about it together. Now, this is our June book, so it's our sixth choice. Now, the previous five books that we have chosen, we've both ended up really liking. This time,
I would dispute the Wren.
well, okay.
Yeah. In general, we've had a great success with our book picks. They've been some of my best reads of the year.
Or put it another way, like the slight didn't absolutely love passionately the Wren was something that we shared.
That's true. Yeah.
So I'd say this is the first book where I think we have slightly different opinions.
We've disagreed a little bit about this book.
Tilly and Rose disagree, shock. Okay, so let me say what the book is. So it's You Dreamed of Empires by Alvaro Enrigue. And he's a Mexican writer, and I think it's the second of his books to be translated into English. And this was translated relatively swiftly. I think it came out in about 2020. It was translated and came out here in January of this year. And the translator was Natasha Wimmer, not sure which is, who's known for her translations, I think, of Roberto Bolaño. Good translator. It's, I think, fair to say, an unusual book. But the basic kind of premise of the book is that we're in, I think it's 1520. We're in Tenochtitlan, what is now Mexico City, so part of the Mexica Empire. And Hernan Cortez and the Spanish conquistadors, as we know them now, are just arriving in the city to meet Moctezuma. So that's the setup for the book. So where do we start, Tilly? Do we start with me saying why it was wonderful, or you having a different viewpoint? Is there anything you liked about the book? Shall we say that first?
I might need you to go first so that I can try and remember if there was anything that I liked. No.
Okay. Something
I just wasn't. I wasn't drawn in. I wasn't impressed. It was all right, but it had just so many flaws. Anyway, I'll pass it over to you, and you can persuade me how wonderful it was.
Okay. Well, I think a problem one might have coming to this book is expecting it to be historical fiction, because it's set, that is not unreasonable. It's set in 1520, and the majority of the characters in the book are real historical figures. There's one amongst the main characters. There's one notable exception. He's kind of added a member to Cortez's party so that we can get a slightly different take on things through that character. So, but apart from that, they're basically all real people. So that, and it's a real place, and we know things really happened then. So it's fair enough to expect historical fiction, and that is actually not what we get, is it? What we get is it's kind of almost fantasy, I would say. And if that's not what you're anticipating, I could see that would be discombobulating, shall we say.
Yes, although I would say that I wasn't really expecting historical fiction or fantasy or anything, because I all I knew was it was like a Mexican author writing about that time period. I don't think I had strong expectations it didn't meet. I just had, right. You said this is a great book, you should read it, and yeah.
Yeah, because I'd literally just read it, and we were picking.
And you're normally reliable.
Yes, well, exactly, and this was I guess a real Ros book. So what to kind of give the sort of the shape of it is basically it's set over 24 hours approximately.
4 hours, more less. Like about 12.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's that, you know, take a huge turning point in history and really home in on, you know, a moment when things went one way and could have gone another. Yeah, I suppose is the point. Oh, Steve's wandered in while we're recording. That's okay. Sorry about the noises off, everybody. We'll carry on. Um, yeah, so and the heart of the book is, I suppose, looking at the encounter between Cortez and Moctezuma, but it's so much more than that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And if I think one of the things that I loved about this book, which I'm thinking you might have also liked, was it's very, if I say sensual, I don't mean as in, you know, passions. I mean, you know, more like sensory, I suppose.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
got a lot of vivid descriptions of the environment and particularly the physical setting of the palaces that they're in, the baths and the clothes and things. Yeah,
Yeah,
that was enjoyable.
But more than that, like the smells and the tastes, you know, and the sensations, you know, what it's like to be a grubby Spanish man who's been predominantly on horseback for weeks and gets to get into a gorgeous outdoor pool bath. And you can see the sort of seduction and attraction of the culture they're encountering at the same time, you know, like the horror of it because the priests smell of blood and are, you know, hideous, and then the pool is, you know, the sort of the culture shock almost on both sides is a really strong feature, but and sensation, smells, sensory things are a big part of that. The comfortable sandals, I love the comfortable sandals.
Yes.
It's like, wow, these people here, they have really comfortable sandals. When I've been wearing my horrible old boots for weeks, you know.
For so long, yeah.
Yeah. And it did, for me, it brought that. I mean, I've read about, you know, the conquest of Mexico. I've read about the city of Tenochtitlan. You know, it's not unfamiliar to me. It has never come to life for me in the way that it did in this book. You know, the labyrinthine palace, the way the city is. It's really hard to imagine this city built on kind of almost islands, and
Yeah.
it works.
So for me, I would say the scene setting is the strongest part of the book, and it's the part that really works and the part that draws you in. Personally, I just found that everything else didn't work. So and just having a wonderful scene setting and description and sensory experience didn't counterbalance the very strange issues around pacing, the lack of character progression, the flaws on the other side didn't draw me through. And I might be saying this a bit stronger because you're so loving it so much. I just wasn't so enthusiastic. I think it's very
Well, I want to just argue with one of those things, what specific thing, which is about characters. But if you want to finish your thought, and then we'll come back to characters, okay?
Yes. Well, no, I would like to talk about characters a bit more anyway. So for me, a lot of it was about the time frame and the pacing, and it starts on the day that they meet, sort of at lunchtime, and it makes the point that this is very close to the winter solstice, and the days are very, very short, and there's not much time in the day, and everything has to be done before sunset. And starts at lunchtime with this long meal, and then everybody goes off and they all have naps, and they all like have all of these various interactions, walk long distances and stuff, and it's still not sunset. I guess it's supposed to be a sort of a dreamlike, slightly hallucinogenic world almost, where reality is a little bit flexible, which is why, you know, you'd say it leans into maybe a slightly fantasy yes, fantastical category. but I just found it, I don't know, a little bit frustrating. And I was just thinking, why not just, why fix yourself in this trap of, oh, I've got to complete all of this within a certain number of hours, if you're then going to completely disregard that time frame that you've set for yourself. It just didn't, it bothered me when perhaps it shouldn't have done. And obviously the events take place over that time, but they also reflect back to things that happened earlier, and kind of project ideas forward into the future at times of things that might be going to happen in the future. So it is a bit of a flexible time frame, but yeah, I just, that did nag at me almost every chapter.
Yes, I can understand that. Although I think a lot of things were happening simultaneously. So we'd get an hour-long scene, say, and then another hour-long scene, but those hour-long scenes were happening at the same time.
I understood that, because I'm not completely dim, but I still felt that if you added together the hours of activity, particularly like a principal character like Moctezuma, or something, where, you know, it talks about how he naps for ages,
Yeah,
and ages, and then
he's
he does
always
all
going
of
to
these
sleep.
other things, goes and meets with the mayor, goes and, you know, like, yeah.
All right. Well, I wasn't adding up, and you may well be right. Yeah, but I suppose I kind of was in a suspension of disbelief thing by then, so that kind of detail wasn't worrying me, because I was really engaged by the characters. And you say there wasn't character development, whereas I really loved the characters. I particularly, I mean, if we just leave Cortez and Montezuma to one side for a minute, it was the sort of one step down characters that were, in terms of plot, that were the most interesting. So Atoshli, who's Montezuma's sister, but also his wife and princess, she was like, she was I really engaged with her as a personality. She was odd and strong, and kind of not, I'm trying to think of the word, you know, he didn't try and turn her into some sort of super wonderful center of, you know, goodness in the story. She was complex and sort of ambitious, but also affectionate, interested in life and people. That's what I liked about her. Yeah. And then we get a kind of, yeah, you too. And then the sort of corresponding character, Malinali, who's the Nahua woman, who also originally some sort of princessy sort of figure, but who was basically like semi-slave now, but is acting as the conquistador's translator, and she's a multilingual woman, very smart, very interesting.
And how it plays with translation as well is another one of the interesting features of the book, and one of the bits that's done quite well, and the kind of the constant, the miscommunication and the adaptations that the translators make to smooth the social events in this incredibly important meeting. That I enjoyed, and she is a good character. Yes, my problem was that a lot of the best characters just kind of peter out, as the book goes on. It starts to focus more and more on Cortez and Moctezuma, and particularly like the final scenes are very much about the showdown between them, I guess, and Malinali, Atatoshli, Caldera, you know, people that we've started to care about and think actually they're quite an interesting person. They just kind of wander off into the mist. That bothered me particularly for Malinali, because she was such a strong character and had so much potential, and essentially is just dropped after a really quite unpleasant scene, which I would say one of the things that is handled well is that Enrique makes sure to show that Cortez and Moctezuma are both, neither of them are good rulers, and they both do things that are by modern ethical standards, and presumably by ethical standards at the time, fairly horrific, from, you know, summary death sentences to sexual violence. I felt that I never like a book which includes scenes of sexual violence that's told from the point of view of the perpetrator, where the victim or the survivor isn't really given any sort of space to emerge as their own person after the end of it. There is a scene from her perspective afterwards, but it's just kind of like shrugged off, and then she's left. After that, pretty much she's just there for that scene, and then, you know, she's there so much in the first sort of 2/3 of the book, and then she just gets kind of dropped at the end. And I felt like that was potentially gratuitous and probably historically accurate, but not fair to her as a character in a book that I want to read. So yeah, so that was an aspect. And there's another.
But isn't her big scene with Atoshli and the horses after that? I thought, maybe I'm misremembering.
It is after that, but still towards, like, at the ultimate end of the book, she's just kind of written out, more or less.
Oh, but you see, I didn't think she was written out. I thought one of the I think we don't want to give any plot spoilers for this book. I mean, obviously everybody knows what happened in history, but you know that the way the book deals with it will avoid plot spoilers.
Leave history aside when you're reading this.
Yeah, exactly. So I felt that the story almost off it. One of the things he's trying to say is that history can go either way. You know, that there are turning points when things happen to go one way or the other way, and I want to come back to that as an idea. But there are certain characters that I felt he were the ones that we'd perhaps most engaged with and attached to, like Malinali, like Toshli, like Caldera, and that he almost allows them to have a potential future whichever way the history pans out. That, on the contrary, I felt like with them, I thought one way or another they are carrying on. So, but that's interpretation.
Yeah, and I guess that's something that you've inferred because you liked the book, so you've given the author the benefit of the doubt in terms of saying, oh, he's not given us any rounded conclusions for those characters because he wants to leave it open for their futures, whereas I'm seeing, you know, he's done them a disservice by not kind of finishing their story. And likewise on Moctezuma's side, there's his niece Sochi, who he condemns to death, and then we see this very passionate Atatoshi coming forward and saying, you know, you can't kill her, you know, this isn't fair, this isn't right, and like a great scene for her. And I really liked that character of the young girl, and then it's never raised again, and you're just like, well, is she alive, is she not alive, did she get killed? I guess I wanted some answers, and this is not gives any answers.
No, it's definitely not a book that gives you answers. And which brings me, I suppose, to the why I was willing to go along for the ride with the book. Oh, well, there's, you know, we've talked about other reasons, and the humor of the book really helped. You talked about that in relation to the translator. You know, it's often really quite a funny book. But the thing that I think there's a challenge in writing about colonialism, and particularly about colonial conquest, where you have the benefit of hindsight. So it's very hard not to write it as if it were inevitable, you know, as if, you know, these certain people were always going to win, things were always going to go a certain way, and then you sort of write it in that way. And how do you get people to stop and kind of consider the alternatives, or you know, really sort of reflect on the impact and how it was feeling, perhaps for both sides in that situation, you know, how risky it was being a conquistador because you didn't know you were end up, you know, and vice versa. You know, why did, you know, Montezuma, you know, behave in certain ways? So, and there are ways of trying to do that. And one is writing sort of straight alternative history, where you know, you literally say, oh well, if it had gone the other way, let's pretend, you know, and that often doesn't work very well for me. So this seemed like a really kind of like brave, I don't know, in relatively innovative way of trying to ask those questions. Yeah.
And I did like how it was handled in terms of the character of the mayor and the way that he is. So he's a very senior politician in Tenochtitlan. He is trying to kind of, there's constantly scenes with him kind of trying to pull the threads together and trying to line things up and say, actually, you know, why is this happening like this? Where is this person? Do we need to worry about this situation? As I go through the day, I just need to track these things down and try and work out what's happening there and there and there. And just, yeah, like the way that he's trying to maintain control or understanding of a chaotic situation that's unfolding, and you just think, oh, you know, if he can manage to keep all of his threads together, you know, maybe things are going to turn out.
Yeah, and so yes, the remembering that the sort of kind of political manoeuvring and diplomatic manoeuvring that would have been going on, and in that sense, he's trying to be very respectful of the complexity and significance and relative success up to that point of the, you know, well, if we use the word Aztec, that's not the real name. There's a funny line where
that regional power.
Yeah. So you know, I think with some one review that I saw said something like, it's a bit like you know, it's a bit like watching The West Wing or something, you know, that sort of, you know, there's sort of political dramas, you know, but just setting it then and yeah, so that I like.
And you know, as far as they were concerned, the conquistadors were just a small random group in the schema that the vast schema of like political different organizations interacting with each other that they had, and it was they didn't like just a little destabilizing blip that it wasn't necessarily that important.
Yeah. And that actually, you know, it was that the like or this has happened again and again in history, you know, it was tensions within different sort of groupings, different kind of regional powers that created that opening.
Yeah, that allowed the opening.
Yeah. So mixed feelings. I would say, do read this book and form your own opinion. What would you say?
I think people would say, you know, see what you think of this book. If it's something that appeals to you at all, and you don't mind things going a bit meta, then
psychedelic.
It's quite a short book, and it is, you know, quite swift to read and quite engrossing. It's not going to be one of my top books of the year, unlike many of the others that we've read together.
So, what are we going to read for July?
Well, it's Jane Austen July, so we obviously have to read something related to Jane Austen July. And there's a very exciting book coming out this month that we are both very keen to read. So, in keeping with reading new releases, I think that's what we're going to do.
So, Katie Lumsden, or Katie as in Books and Things, has got her second novel. It's being published in the UK in the middle of July. I'm going to the book launch, so I'll pick up a copy for me and for you and post it to you when we'll read it in the latter part of July. And it's called The Trouble with Mrs. Montgomery Hurst, and I'll put links below. It's sort of it's kind of Jane Austen July adjacent, rather than, because I think it's set in about
1840.
Yeah, so it's a little after her life, but knowing Katie, there will be a sort of a bit of Austen flavour in there. I think that she's promised us a bit of that. So, you know, and she is, of course, the Jane Austen July host and has been from the start. So that's the
So
plan.
looking forward to that one. And it will be very different from You Dreamed of Empires, definitely.
Absolutely. It's historical fiction.
Yes, I suppose so.
Yeah, brilliant. I'll have an enjoyable July's reading, everybody else.
Yeah, and thank you for watching.
Thanks for watching.